There's a sense of shame from all who have their political bases. No conservative who goes to their local Conservative association wants to say, I had a great dinner with a Labour MP the other night, and vice versa. So I think there's a great deal of shame sometimes about it. And I totally disagree with that. I think it should be a sense of pride that we can work across party lines to get things done. It's the way in any other workplace in the country. You have to work with people you disagree with. That is the first thing you are told, isn't it? You won't like everyone you work with. You probably won't like most of them at times, but you have to work across those boundaries because you're there to do a job, and that job is very important.
On today's episode of Careers Unwrapped, we're excited to have with us James Matthewson. He's many things. He's a writer, an author, a TV broadcaster, and a political commentator. He's a communications and public affairs professional, really. He's navigated through high-profile roles, including being a Labour Party senior spokesperson in the House of Commons. And today, what we're going to do with James is delve into all sorts of areas around careers in politics and hopefully explore his unique perspective on the evolving landscape of political communications and careers. So, James, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
So I think we can do a bit of an icebreaker straight away into this. And I'm going to ask you for just one-word summaries of the characters of leading politicians over recent years. Are you happy to do this?
Love this. This sounds great. Go for it.
Okay, let's go. Theresa May.
Stubborn.
Boris Johnson.
Chaotic.
Okay, Jeremy Corbyn.
Kind.
Nicola Sturgeon.
Determined.
Okay, and I've got two more here. Rishi Sunak.
That one stumps me a bit, but I'm going to go with out of touch isn't one word, but I've got whatever word would substitute out of touch for one.
You can have hyphens. I'll give you out of touch.
Okay, let's go out of touch. Yeah, let's do that.
And then as a last one, new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer.
I've used determined for Nicola Sturgeon, but I would say again with Keir, if anything, experienced, if not determined, experienced, I would go for.
Great. Thank you. So now we'll get into you in politics. But first of all, what drew you in? What first made you want to become politically active?
Well, I had a very unusual journey, and I often speak at universities about this kind of thing. And I don't know how much of use I am to the universities, because often when the politics students ask me what I did with my politics degree, I have to answer that I haven't got one. So I left school when I was 16, 17. It was incredibly apparent to me and to everyone around me that academia wasn't going to be something I could stick with long term. I had barely made it through my GCSEs, and I think I got away with 3 in the end. To this day, I don't have a maths GCSE, and apparently you can't get a job without one. So I don't know what I've done there, but to this day, I've got 3 GCSEs. I've got English, drama, and music, which make me very underqualified for the roles that I've held. But these roles and these qualifications and the whole process of getting qualifications, doing academia, was just something that was completely an antithesis to me in everything, that the way that I saw the world and worked. I couldn't do it.
Although I can see how English and drama could help you in politics. Maybe less so music immediately.
I think it was William Hague said that I think all politicians are actors and they long for the stage anyway.
So you got a few qualifications. You didn't take it further in academia. How did you step from leaving school at that point to actually starting down a political route?
Yeah, so at that point, I was more bothered about my drama and my literature and all these things that I love being involved in. But I was a terrible student. I later got a diagnosis of Asperger's, now just the autism diagnosis is what they class it as, when I left school when I was 20. And the reason my mum had waited until then to kind of push me to get one was because she didn't want me to have the label through school. She thought it would be a disadvantage. And I think she was right at the time, given what the times were like for that. So I came out, I did a lot of self-realization and kind of, what do I want? What's going to work for me? And realizing that going straight into work was probably going to be the best thing and one of my only options. I came from a single parent background. We didn't have a huge amount. I was going to have to work. Things like the bedroom tax were coming in. This is as I'm slowly getting more politically aware of policies that were actively impacting my life and my mum's life. So I thought, well, I'll go to work, I'll get a job. And it was on that kind of process of first working in a stationery sales company. I did an apprenticeship there. I was then headhunted to work in car sales. And whilst working in car sales, which is one of the most toxic work environments I've ever been in. And I've been at Westminster, so that tells you a lot. Was I realized that actually there are so few protections here for the nature of the way this is structured, with commission being the only way to make the money, really. And there's a very small base salary. The protections were virtually non-existent for salesmen who didn't get along with the boss. And I joined a trade union, and I was drawn towards the trade union movement. And through that, I started reading more about politics, a lot of it left-wing politics. And a short period after that, I had walked out of this job. It was the day of my friend's funeral, and one of my very closest friend's brother's funeral had sadly died in a traffic collision at the university. And we were all getting together, all our old school friends, for this funeral. And my boss said to me, I said, I need the afternoon off work. I booked it a month in advance, And he said, no, I've changed my mind. You can't have it. I said, well, I've got to go. And he said, no, I don't think you do. You'll stay here, otherwise you'll lose your job. So I took my tie off. I took my company car keys and I threw them at him and I said, stuff your job. And I walked out, and it felt incredibly liberating at the time. I went to my friend's funeral, did all that, came back and thought, oh, I haven't got a job now. So, what do I do now? And I ended up in a car park hut a week later, taking £2 cuts. I'd been selling cars the week before for great commission and fantastic wage. And then I was in a car park hut on minimum wage, taking £2 a pop for people to park a car in a stunning area of rural Northumberland. But I had no heat, no electricity, nothing. And I was there for a year doing that.
And you used some of your sales experience, your ability, therefore, to be able to talk to people, to get some empathy, to communicate, to sell. You took that into politics. And did you go into a communications and PR role first of all?
Yeah, so it's that really, through the trade union, the experience that came to me, and sitting in this car park out day after day, I had nothing to do but read. So I started reading everything and anything I could get my hands on. I was saying to people in the union who I was active with now, because a lot of people won't realize the trade union movement is ancient, is very old. There are a lot of ancient people in it as well. So people will take up a position like branch secretary, and they can stay in that beyond working. So you could have people who are in their 70s in positions of influence in that union. So they're always looking for younger people to come through. And because I got involved, there was all this option of courses and would you come and do this? Would you help us with social media? We have no idea what that is. We know you've got a bit of experience doing comms and marketing, which I'd done in my kind of stationary sales role. And I thought, okay, I'll get trained up on this and stuff. And I did. And it was through that gave me the stepping stone to eventually then one day saying, do you want to be in the Labour Party? Because we're affiliated to them. You get a membership for free. You can get active with the party. And everything I had read up to that point led me to that conclusion that I wanted to be in the Labour Party. So upon doing that and then eventually being headhunted for a role working for a backbench Labour MP, everything was communications based. It was all about how do we communicate what we as either the trade union movement or the Labour Party want to do and want to help people with. And all of the reading I was doing in my little car park hut leading up to that was along those lines as well.
And so once you got that job working for an MP, you start to sort of peel back the curtain a little bit to look behind the scenes of what goes on in politics. What were the first few big eye-opening moments, the sort of, wow, this is how it works, that came in those really early months in that role?
So I think for me, it was probably the amount of abuse that was leveled at MPs of all political persuasions. You are instantly, the second you affiliate yourself to a political party, you are hated by everyone who hates that political party, okay? You knock on their door, you're responsible for everything that political party's ever done. And they don't care you joined a month ago and you've got no former connection. So it was a lot of abuse very quickly. I then stood as a candidate for the party as well. And so I got the double flack for working for an MP and being a candidate as well. I was, I think, 22 at the time, 21, 22. So it was a lot to kind of shoulder and a lot of abuse to take on. And then the other thing that was very eye-opening when you come into it as a kind of ideological, kind of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young person was the fact that even people who you agree with ideologically, for me it was people on the left, were having private conversations and meetings with the most right-wing, the most kind of conservative of conservatives, because that is how progress is made in Westminster. It's collaborative. It has to be. So you could be on a rally one day shouting about we need to overthrow this government, they're corrupt and all the rest of it. And then the next day you would be in a meeting with them talking nice about how you can help education in your constituency. So it was a complete kind of shock to me that that is how business would be done.
I can imagine on both of those sides that really is jaw-droppingly eye-opening, especially in your early 20s. And the offence side is, of course, really serious because MPs have been murdered and attacked in the last decade in this country. And how do you think that is affecting people who want to go into politics, or is affecting those who are in politics? And also, is it from when you started to now? Do you think it's getting worse? Do you think it's getting better?
I think it is getting worse. And I think there are clear ways to make it better. There are certain social media platforms specifically that make it a lot worse. I now in my TV work, just because some of the channels that I do, which are conservative media, and I'm putting myself in front of those people who disagree with me. That's what I like doing most. I'd rather do that than have conversations with people who agree with me. There's no point in doing that in my mind. But the price that you pay for that is roughly every week I'll get around 6 or 7 death threats via email. And that's just me. And I'm a nobody. And I'm doing TV 4 or 5 times a week. So that's kind of for me. You can imagine being a member of parliament and being the main focus for somebody who lives in your constituency, how frequent some of that abuse can be. And from the same people as well. And you can inform the police about it. But until something happens, as was the case with David Amos and Joe Cox and those others who've been assaulted and tragically murdered in those cases, until that happens, nobody really knows what to do with it. How far does a threat go?
That particular area is an area we could have a whole conversation upon. And I think we might come back to it because people who are thinking, I want to play a role in politics, we need good people on all parties with all sorts of viewpoints in there to make things happen. But they need to feel that they can do that in a way that's safe. And I think it's interesting how when you were describing what it felt, what you learned at the beginning, that the other side of that is actually the collaborative piece that has to happen to make things go forward. So if we're sitting on the outside, we see our clips of one side shouting at the other side, and then a big election, everyone shouts even more, and then they change sides and they still shout at each other. And what's actually going on behind the scenes to discuss the best way forward for people and for the country?
Yeah, and I think if we saw more of that, because there's a sense of shame from all who have their political bases. No conservative who goes to their local conservative association wants to say, I had a great dinner with a Labour MP the other night, and vice versa. So I think there's a great deal of shame sometimes about it. And I totally disagree with that. And I think it should be a sense of pride that we can work across party lines to get things done. It's the way in any other workplace in the country. You have to work with people you disagree with. That is the first thing you are told, isn't it? You won't like everyone you work with. You probably won't like most of them at times, but you have to work across those boundaries because you're there to do a job. And that job is very important. I think if we saw more of that reflected in the media, and if politicians were more honest about how collaborative that is, we wouldn't have people kind of coming in and getting the shock, but encouraging young people to stand for elected office. There is no shortage of encouraging young people to get involved as staffers or behind the scenes roles. That feels comfortable. That feels a lot more safe in their mind a lot of the time. But to put yourself forward as the elected individual, I mean, that takes a lot of gumption and you don't often come back from it. I mean, who employs an ex-MP who lost their seat? What future is there for you? So it's quite an interesting question as to what we do with those people.
So you did this support role to begin with to a Labour MP, and then you decided, actually, I'm going to have a go myself. Which seat did you get put forward for selection?
So it was a county council election at first, and this was in my hometown. So my hometown had always been, in my memory, had been Liberal Democrat because the Conservatives lost it in a by-election in the 60s. So there was a chance for me to try and come through the middle as a Labour candidate. The Labour Party needs candidates everywhere, and it stands paper candidates normally. What we call a paper candidate is somebody who it puts their name on the paper and doesn't do anything. So that there are people, if there's members in the seat or people who want to vote Labour, they've got someone they can vote for, but you know you're not going to win it, so you don't bother doing anything. I didn't seem to get that memo. I was a paper candidate who suddenly started doing a load of stuff. And it really, really annoyed people. And because it's my hometown, I had me and about 6 of my friends going around, and it scared the local Conservatives to death. And they were like, this isn't meant to be happening. You can't win the seat. What are you doing? And do they know something we don't know and all this stuff? So in the end, we went from 7th place to 4th place. I was thrilled with that, but it was a challenge. And it resulted in me walking around my hometown, a very small town where everyone knows everyone. And I was going into the co-op one day to get some bread, and a guy spat on me. And I thought, hang on a minute, is this really? And I challenged him, and he said, well, you Labour scum. And I thought, I've never felt more safe. I mean, my hometown is the most kind of idyllic little hometown. Alnwick in Northumberland. It's where that 2 of the Harry Potter films were filmed. There's a castle. It's a beautiful little town, but just the animosity that was there because you were all of a sudden associated with a political party, I think that really informed my thinking as I went forward, working in politics as well.
It's clearly, as you said earlier, there are some social media platforms that feed this, that build an increase in people being comfortable being abusive online, first of all. But that's clearly stepping into real life as well. And people are more abusive, more violent towards politicians. Where do we go with that in terms of still wanting brilliant, bright, passionate people to come into politics, but not, quite frankly, but just being put off by what's involved?
I think we have to protect them. And it's not a conversation that people like to have. This idea that politicians have everything and anything they ever want and they live some luxurious life. Like, I've got 2 mates who've just been elected in that most recent general election there for the first time. One of them was working on the checkout at Tesco 2 days before he was an MP. That's kind of how quickly things can turn around for you. The second that he became an MP, people are shouting at him about how rich he is, and he's not even had a paycheck yet, not a single paycheck from Parliament. So this divide in our minds as to the life that politicians live in. Don't get me wrong, there are many rich politicians, and there are those who've got jobs on the side. They're using their influence to set up agencies or lobbying firms or anything like that. It will help their business, whatever their business is. But there are also many normal MPs. You can't group them all in the same category. You can go and look at their expenses. You can go and look at their exactly what they need. But the problem is those who claim more expenses a lot of the time get more criticism. They're often the ones who don't have the luxurious lifestyle or the money. They need to rely on the expense system. They need to rely on that. It's a bit like the debate recently about Keir Starmer and his free clothes and all the rest of it. Now, I'm not saying for 1 second that he can't afford suits, but if you're expected as the Prime Minister to wear a Brooks Brothers suit that's 250 grand and your salary is 110 grand, yeah, are you going to buy that? Of course you're not. And then someone says, well, you should have one. I will get it for you as your friend. And of course you do it. So it's these systems that exist, these expectations. It's very strange, the whole world.
I think that on that piece, clearly that once you become the party in power as opposed to the party in opposition, then quite rightly, the microscope is more finely tuned on you now. And so these things come out in the wash, these questions are asked. Whichever party is the one that's in power is getting that. Now, you moved then into a role of being the spokesperson within the Labour Party for one of its more senior, high-profile figures. What was that job like?
So, yeah, it was set against a very unique political background, which was Jeremy Corbyn's being elected as the leader of the Labour Party. There was a mass exodus, if you'll remember, from the shadow cabinet and from those people who said, I'm not going to work with Jeremy and all the rest of it. My boss at the time, my gaffer, was one of Jeremy's closest allies. And he was kind of seen as a Rottweiler for Jeremy. He was kind of one of those on the left who had a lot of gumption about him.
And for those listening, who was that?
This was Ian Lavery. So Ian and me are good friends still. Ian's an MP, just been re-elected from his hometown of Ashton in Northumberland. Ian was a former coal miner, turned union rep through the NUM, was very prolific in the strike when he was only 18 years old in the 80s. And then through the trade union movement, he's become a politician over the years. So he's a former coal miner from Northumberland. You can imagine what his politics are like, and he shared my politics. So it was great, this kind of ideological alignment with the person you worked for. You didn't have to bite your tongue every 5 minutes and think, well, should you be saying that? Or fully aligned. And there was a lot to be done. Been trying to defend Jeremy's leadership. And for me, I had been part of that Corbyn project. I'd been very ideologically immersed in it. And it wasn't until after the 2019 general election, so when the rise for 2016, 17, 18, and then 19, and then that was when I started to have my doubts and some changes inside my own mind about what I believed and what we were doing and if it was the right thing. And I had seen so many errors made. I'd seen things from a different angle. I'd seen things I didn't like on the left and certain things that were covered up and all the rest of it. So things that I really was having a hard time stomaching, to a point where I ended up leaving. And then when I did, I published, upon resigning, I published a paper that ruffled some feathers at the time.
You've ruffled a few feathers along the way, but I think part of that you enjoy doing, it comes across, but part of it is you don't change things unless you're ruffling feathers. And I also am picking up, as an outsider to the political scene, that the politics between parties, so between Conservatives and Labour, Liberal Democrats, Scottish National, the politics between parties seems relatively obvious to the outsider. But what often gets things done or doesn't, breaks things or fixes things, is the politics within those parties. And you've been close to some of that. And how did you find that affects the role of being a spokesperson? And actually, what does a spokesperson do each day? Are you firefighting, or are you being proactive in your communications? What did it feel like?
You're meant to be proactive in your communications. Inevitably, you're fighting fires all over the place. You're normally just responding to press and to be. There was a period between the 2017 and 2019 general elections where the Labour Party had been put on permanent campaign footing. So if people are able to remember, 2017, Labour came close, the Tories came close to lose, whichever way you want to swing it. But it was very tight and it was very close. And because of that, the consensus in the Labour Party was it's just a matter of time. It could be weeks till they collapse. It could be months. We'll be there. We'll be ready and we'll win. So they put us on permanent campaign footing. Now, of course, it was 2 years until the next general election. So people were permanently exhausted for that entire period, and trying to work in that atmosphere and trying to deal with the press. You would have press ring and you have your answer from a politician. Well, what do you want to tell them? Well, tell them to F off, would be what you'd been told. That's what you need to tell them. I'd say, well, can I put it a different way? No. And they would sit there with you until they made sure that you'd said exactly those words. So the relationships between the press and the media and the party were crumbling. They weren't very good to start with, but they certainly weren't good now. And I could see these errors being made, and it was very, very frustrating when you wanted to be proactive and you knew there was opportunity. So there were splits happening, and people will never believe until they're in it just how factional a political party can be internally. You've got people who hate each other, people who desperately hate each other and have hated each other their whole careers, who work together. And you know that, such and such, if it was me and you, if it was Mark and James, well, we can't put them in the same team. We have to work around that. Well, Mark's lobbying against James at the moment. He's trying to get rid of him from this. You wouldn't tolerate it anywhere else, but it just happens because it's seen as the ruthless ambition of politics, but also because of factions and tiny disputes on what you believe in, that I would get along better with conservatives who completely disagreed with my ideology to those people who had a tiny difference in opinion on the smallest policy. And it was just the most bizarre thing to try and wrap your head around.
And you've now moved from inside the walls to outside the walls. And a lot of your work now is in public affairs. It's in lobbying. And you've done that in-house at some charities, foundations, and now you're freelancing. So what is the life of a lobbyist?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's whatever you want it to be when it's freelance, really. So I'm very lucky that I have my TV, my broadcast, my writing work that I see as my career. I see that as that's what I'm working on. That's the thing I'm growing. That's the thing. I would love to be more prominent in mainstream TV at some point. It's a world I never thought I would be in, but coming back to the drama stuff, it's kind of full circle and it makes sense. But politics has been the way into that for me. And I mean, every day I'm doing something with TV and broadcast. I am this afternoon after this recording. But I also on the side to make sure that I can live and have a quality of life and pay my bills, because believe it or not, TV doesn't pay that well. it's set, the prices are regulated by Ofcom as to what you can pay political commentators. I've been lured across to America so many times. People have said, because over there they don't have that. Political commentators charge 10 grand an interview. Here it's like the BBC will give you 20 quid if you come on for 5 minutes.
There's a whole separate conversation about the influence of money on politics, especially in America.
Exactly, but we're quite regulated here, which I think is good. I think it's a good thing. I say that and then I get my £20 check still, but we move on. But I have on the side my private kind of a small kind of practice of lobbying. And what that allows me to do is, rather than just having to take every and any client and argue for them at government and lobby for them and advocate for them, it means I can pick and choose, and I can be a bit choosy with what I work in. Most recently, I've been doing some stuff with AI companies in the UK. I've been working with these and charitable campaign organizations that want to try and work around homelessness issues, things like that. So I will know the politicians who they need to speak to. I will try and get them meetings with those politicians. It's a very unique line of work in the sense that you can never promise what you're going to achieve. You go forward, you help them craft their message. If somebody comes to me and says, look, I want to talk to the government, I want to share what I'm doing with them, it's normally to try and either influence what the government's doing in the way of policy, or it's to try and grow their own reputation. If it's a private company, sometimes they'll be after government contracts. You've got to be upfront with them. It's a bit like being a lawyer. I say to them from the start, you need to tell me what you're after here, because if I don't know, then I'm going to point you in the completely wrong direction. And if they say to me, well, I'm after a government contract and we want to grow the bit, then I'll say, I think you're probably better off with a better lobbyist who focuses on that. I'm a one-man band. I can make the introductions. I have relative influence in the Labour Party. My TV work feeds into that and supports that. But it is a way for me to be able to say, if I agree and I believe in the cause that they're trying to influence, then I'm on board and I'll help them do it.
And the whole world of being a lobbyist, it feels quite in the shadows. It feels quite grey. And you can think that there are some areas where there's big money behind it, because government decisions can hugely affect financing of massive infrastructure projects. There's also influence in there, I would assume, of an international political nature, countries that want to be seen more favourably by the British government, but may have reputational issues for the way they treat their own citizens. So how much does lobbying work?
It's a very interesting question. I would say, as a lobbyist, it's whatever you put into it, I think. And if you come at it from, I want to pay this amount a month and I want to have this many results by this date, you're not going to come out of it very well. The big agencies will try and get their clients to be on a couple of years contract at least, so they can be like, look, we will gradually build your name over time. There's no way to put this on steroids and do it quickly. But ultimately, what you come out of that with is your company or the person from your organization might be asked to be on several government panels, advising the government on how they craft their policy. They might be forming an APPG, an all-party parliamentary group in Parliament. They might be in charge of various different things. And when it comes to it, and the government wants an expert on the subject area that you work in, you're going to be the first one they're calling on. That influence a lot of the time isn't just about what you could get from the government, but you then take that relationship elsewhere. If people who are looking for investors, they'll often say, we have outstanding existing relationship with the UK government. And that's a boon, isn't it, for any company? So things like that. But I do think lobbying, whatever you put into it, you'll get something out of it. But is your lobbyist trying to get you to prolong that? And because I can't afford to say it'll give me 2 years, because they would say, get out of here, I have to do things a lot quicker and have actual KPIs and measurable returns of investment to show what I've done for my money, rather than, I had a chat with someone about you yesterday and then bill them an invoice for it. So you've got to show what you can do.
A lot of the people we know who listen to us are in the early stages of their career. They might be in a first or second job. They might still be at university or at college, and they're thinking, what do I need to get on? So I'm always interested to ask, James, if you could go back and speak to your 16-year-old self, the one who maybe had just opened their drama and English and music GCSE results, from your experience now in developing your career path, what advice would you give back to your younger self about things to do and things not to do?
I would say don't be as earnest. I really came things, and I don't know if it's, I'm an autistic man. I'm very proud to be autistic and say I am. I don't talk about it every few minutes. I say that, and I've published a book about it. I don't talk about it every few minutes, but for me, it's undoubtedly shaped the way that I am and the way that I think and the way people see me. But I think sometimes, especially when I was younger, there was a naivety that came with it, that everybody would take me at face value. There are people out there who have no interest in understanding you, who have no interest in helping you, and trying to realize who's on your side and who isn't. If you've got a strong support network that you can rely on, I would say, and this is controversial in many senses, but you don't need to have friends at work. If you want to get along and you want to achieve something, you're there for a certain reason, then don't worry about going into a workplace, becoming best friends with people, it being part of your life and all the rest. Everyone I've seen who's succeeded or moved forward to their goals has seen it as a workplace. It's there to fit there and to serve a purpose in their life, and they're moving through it relatively quickly. I don't know many people who've stayed in politics. If you've worked at Downing Street for more than 2 months, okay, then you can write a book about your time at Downing Street. You can be a political editor of a newspaper because you were at Downing Street. 2 months, that's all it takes. So to move through things quickly, to jump at opportunities, I would say, because I definitely held back. And maybe it was the imposter syndrome, maybe it was some of that, maybe it was the fact that I didn't have a degree, I didn't have anything like that. But I thought maybe I need to serve my time, when actually now I see people younger than me who are flying further up the road, and you're thinking, all right, okay, yeah, you didn't wait for someone to tell you you could do it, you just did it.
I think it's so interesting that, because so many of the conversations I have within Careers Unwrapped, people will talk about culture at work, values, how you want an environment that suits you, your authentic self, and all of this. And yet you're saying there almost, don't worry too much about that. Don't worry about having your friends at work. Obviously, you need, hopefully, a really strong support network outside of that. But I'm imagining part of that also because the work you went into, in other words, somebody who is thinking, I want this very personable network within where I work. I want that to be comforting. I want them to look after me. It sounds like you're going to need a thicker skin than that if you go into politics.
And I do have a lot of doubt around it. And it's my own experiences. There are good employers out there. There are great employers out there. There are wonderful world prizes. Of course there are. I haven't worked for many of them. And that's the thing. And I think when you haven't, you realize people can say things to you. And this is part of the autistic experience more than anything. But people can say things and I can say, all right, okay, they said that. That means they think that or they believe that. No, that's not. And I had a sharp lesson learning that, especially in politics, that don't take people at their word a lot of the time in politics. But I would say capitalism ultimately is, I don't love it. Obviously, my politics were kind of the antithesis to it when I was a lot younger. I wanted to overthrow it. Nobody's going to overthrow it, and nor do I think they should now. However, it's a game to me, and it's a game to be played. And it isn't, for me, you can settle and you can have a lovely work life, and it can be a 9 to 5. And if that suits you, fantastic, and that's all that matters. But if you're somebody who wants to move through things quickly, get as much experience as you can in a way similar to what I have, because then you can use that experience and you can do something like I've done, which is freelance. And I would never go back because I don't have a boss now. And it's the greatest thing in the world. Nobody tells me what time I need to wake up, what I need to do. And that suits me as a neurodiverse person more than anything would.
I think there's a new book in here, James. There is something about succeeding in a toxic work environment. From my 20s till later, from car salesperson to political jouster. But James, this has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. I think that one thing I've definitely got from this short conversation is a really colorful flavor of what working in politics is like. And I think some people may listen to it and think, I really don't want that at all. Does it have to be like that? And leading side, maybe it doesn't have to be, but it is at the moment. But for others who are thinking, actually, I can do that. I can deal with that. And I want to be somebody who changes things and makes things better along ways I believe in. Then I think you've shown how to get your foot in the door and what it might feel like to get in there. And from the negative sides of it, the abuse the politicians and their supporters get, which is, we know is unacceptable, through to the really positive sides of the way that cross-party groups get on work together and collaborate. And that's how they actually get things done. So I think that's been really fascinating, James. So thank you so much for joining us on Careers Unwrapped. From your one-word summaries of leading politicians to your sort of peeling back the curtain of what it's like inside, it's been really interesting and a really useful viewpoint of a career in and around politics. So thank you very much, James.
Lovely. Thanks for having me, Mark. Cheers.
This podcast is sponsored by We Are Futures. To find out more about We Are Futures and how we can introduce your brand, business, or organisation to the mass markets of tomorrow, visit www.wearefutures.com. Make sure to search for Careers Unwrapped in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at We Are Futures, thanks for listening.